Hey, Mr. E Jeep Shop here. Gonna give you a little update on the old flat fender CJ3B with an Iron Duke that is actually in it now. So talking points, I'll start off with the bell housing. So I'm using a Novak adapter, and this is the more expensive adapter that comes with a new input shaft that moves the engine forward, because apparently these bell housings are narrower than the Jeep bell housing. So if you were to just keep it with the same input shaft, you would end up having to move the transmission forward or cut a huge hole so the engine can fit in there, obviously. So I bought the more expensive Novak adapter, like I just said, and did not realize that it was designed for the early AMC Iron Duke. This is an S10 Iron Duke. I chose an S10 Iron Duke because millions of these things were made and are still around. AMC Iron Dukes, I've never seen one. So you can see this is GM 2.5, 1988. I also liked the idea of an 88 Iron Duke because it was available, it was cheap, and they're roller cams. I actually got two of them for like $300 total. So I just kind of picked the best of the two engines, which was really just the block from the one engine that spun a rod bearing, and then everything else off of the other block. That block had a pretty serious ring ridge, and it's more than even a ring ridge. It was kind of a bulge at the top that you can see by the reflection there, sort of. Yeah, it's blown out. But it was serious. Like, it would have to get bored probably 30 over to square that away. This one was nowhere near as bad, so I just sprayed it with mineral spirits, gave it a ball hone, and then gave it new bearings, new rings. I didn't even polish the crank. I did seat the valves. I think I've got videos on that. And, new water pump and stuff like that. So, Iron Duke. It's still the EFI intake manifold, so I made an aluminum adapter there, and I also milled open the slot so it was wide. It wasn't quite wide enough for the two-barrel Weber, but it's definitely wider, and then I just ported that adapter to make the transition. All right, so I'm kind of jumping around. Back on the adapter. So the adapter was designed for a V8 style bell housing like the early AMC Iron Dukes had. Well, I used the metric era S10 bell housing because that's what I had. This thing had a hydraulic clutch with a pivot ball on the far side, and their kit, I had purchased this fork. The fork wasn't included in the kit, but I purchased this fork, and the pivot ball goes right here. So I was able to locate where it needed to be, drilled and tapped a hole, drilled and tapped a bung, welded the bung to it, and then threaded their pivot ball in that came with this fork, and then boom, I've got a functioning fork. And then I also did a little bracket that bolts to where the hydraulic cylinder bolted to, and that bracket retains the return spring. So everything there seems to be working, but I'll know more. Adjusting the clutch was pretty difficult. I'm not sure that I got it right. I'm almost tempted to cut a hole in the bottom of the bell housing to see what the air gap is, because when I'm just feeling it, it feels kind of weird. It feels like there's a huge air gap, even though when I measured it, there wasn't an air gap. Maybe the pressure plate is just that weak. I don't know. Which brings me to the next interesting point. So again, this adapter was for an AMC Iron Duke, so the splines on the input shaft did not line up with a metric era S10 clutch disc. So, and the flywheel that I have is a metric era S10 flywheel, so a 1980 Monza pressure plate won't bolt to it. So I ended up buying two clutch kits, and I've got the Monza clutch disc in front of a S10 pressure plate. Yep, that's what I did. I bought Novak's adjustable throwout bearing and adjusted it pretty far out, but it was full thread engagement. Hopefully I got it right. Again, like feeling the clutch, it feels kind of weird, unless it's just really that soft, because I mean, just by hand, it feels like that's all dead pedal, or just free space, and then that's where it feels like it's disengaging. So we'll see. Another thing that I'm a little concerned with is the clutch fork. Let me grab a light. All right, the clutch fork there. Yeah, this is really working, isn't it? There you go. So the clutch fork there and the brake arm there. So if I clutch and hit the brakes, I might have to do some grinding on the top of that clutch fork. But you can see my bracket back there and then the spring. So we'll see how that goes. That pretty much covers the adapter, the metric bell housing, the combination of clutch parts. See, what else did I have to talk about? Motor mounts. This thing is obviously still floating in here and it'll bleed down, so I put that underneath it to support it so it doesn't bleed down. And I took an air chisel and knocked the brackets off, which are, well, they're under my welding. There they are. I knocked the brackets, so I knocked the heads off the rivets with an air chisel. I bought this guy, I didn't have one, but I bought that guy. It was only like 120 bucks, and the Torque Test channel did a review on it. It scored really high, and it did get the job done, but it took considerably longer than I expected. It took about 7 to 8 minutes per rivet. But it's done. I put it away. Makes a lot of racket too. So motor mounts had the sleeve in it, and I looked around for what the dimension of that sleeve that fits in there was, and it matched up with the early style big block Chevy mounts, and Summit makes them. There's the part numbers. It fits in there. It fits pretty tight, but it does fit in there, and I did have to clearance this ear a little bit because there was a return bend that was kind of fighting it. The other side over here has got something like that going on too, and a huge gap. So you can see this mount it's slid on there, but I can't get the bolt through it because it's not seated up enough. So I'm going to have to take that off and see what's preventing it from seating completely, and then just get it working. And like I said, there's a big gap between the frame and there. So on this side, I believe what I'm going to do is take that square channel right here, figure out what kind of angle it needs to be cut at, using probably cardboard aided design, and then weld some brackets to it to attach it to the frame. Probably going to weld it to the frame. I don't think I want to bolt it to the frame because you can't really get a nut inside of these frame rails. They're all boxed in, except for those two holes right there. So could possibly reach in there, but I feel like I would be dropping the nuts and getting frustrated. So I'll probably just weld it to the frame. So yeah, I've got big block Chevelle, like 1969 motor mounts that fit in there. And then on the driver's side here, I had an issue with that motor mount slid on to the bracket with the bolt in it, and the steering wheel turned to the left. that steering linkage was hitting the bottom of it. So I had to basically slice it, used my plasma cutter, sliced it off, and then moved the sleeve part over to this side of the steering shaft, and then welded a channel in between. And the channel in between was 2 1/4 inches. I could not find a good channel, so I had to basically make one. But this is it all painted up. It looks fantastic, doesn't it? Like I didn't even bother grinding the slag off or anything. But yeah, it's 3/16 steel. I just sliced 3 parts and then welded 2 of them together, and then welded those in here, and then took the other wall and tacked it in there, and then just seam welded it all around. I just painted this, so it's still, yeah, it's still tacky, it's still wet. So those are the motor mounts. And then the frame brackets on this side, once I've got that paint dry and everything just bolted in here, I imagine what I'll probably do is take some 3/16 steel. I might buy a thicker one because this is 2 inches and Tractor Supply does have 3-inch, which is going to be stronger. Man, I got that paint all over my fingers. But yeah, on this side I imagine I'm taking this stuff and kind of same thing, just figuring out how to cut it and attach it, weld it to itself, and then weld it to the frame, and then I'll have motor mounts. I really hope that clutch fully disengages isn't going to be a bunch of drama with me having to adjust that fork even closer to the brake lever there. I mean, I only have so much, and I've already pinned and Loctited the throwout bearing, so it's not like I can adjust that further out. But I mean, I measured it and measured it and measured it, so I don't know how it couldn't be disengaging the thing. You know, I set it for like 1/8 of an inch air gap like it's supposed to. Last thing to update, I think, is the fuel pump I bought because, again, metric era Iron Duke, no provision for fuel pump. So I bought a Carter electric fuel pump that I feel like will go right there nicely. And it's on the opposite side of the exhaust, so it should work a lot better than the factory setup that had fuel lines coming all around the exhaust, and it would get hot. As far as this guy, I did have to put some phenolic spacers on here. I mentioned that in a different video. I like phenolic spacers because it keeps the fuel cooler in the bowl, and I had to stack 2 of them because I needed 1/2 inch for the lever to clear, and they don't make a 1/2 inch. Carb Cheater guys do make a 1/2 inch when they feel like it. They didn't have any, so I just bought 2 of those. And last thing is going to be obviously like the choke and the throttle cables are probably going to have to require bracketry coming down here and stuff. But my biggest concern is the fuel pedal. There is nowhere on this block except for there. I think that's threaded. I keep losing my flashlight. Yeah, that is threaded. But the throttle bracket, you know, it comes way out here, and then there's that lever way down here. So I don't know, maybe I can bend it and then mount that lever up there, or figure out how to do a cable all the way. Because even if I do get the bell crank bolted here, I'm still going to have a cable, unless I fabricate a bracket that goes all the way over. I don't even know where all of that stuff is. I've got the pedal stuff in here. Yeah, and there's that bell crank. That could use a little grease. So yeah, maybe I could just bend this guy up, cut it, thread it, change it around. We'll get to that when we get to that. Exhaust, I forgot to even mention that, but with this guy on there, this points straight into the steering box. Ta-da. So, the bottom of that manifold is going to have to get sliced off and then maybe spun around to go more in front of the motor mount setup and then through here. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Either that or I'll slice it off completely and then just weld a tube that goes down and then have the gasket kind of pointing back. And then the exhaust will have to go kind of under the steering rod. So yeah, I knew I'd have to get into exhaust. That's just really obvious. Knew I'd have to get into the gas pedal. So that's pretty much it so far. Basically, I had to rebuild the transmission to get the input shaft in there because the blocker ring on the synchro is so big that it hits the gear on the secondary cluster. So you have to drop that secondary cluster, which has a bunch of needle bearings. So you take a Delrin rod and slide out the steel rod, and the Delrin holds those needle bearings in place. The Delrin rod is shorter, so it fits inside the case, slides down, and then goof with the input shaft. I had a really hard time with this input shaft because there were some really slight tool marks on the synchro cone, and the synchros are grooved. Like so. And those grooves love grabbing onto tool marks. So had to polish that synchro cone quite a bit. I think I started off with 800 and then went after it with 1,000 or 1,500 and just kept doing that until it wouldn't lock up anymore. Because that thing would lock up. You'd put it in first gear, and just by that synchro being kind of stuck on the tool marks, it was acting like it was jammed in second gear. No, is that right? First gear's down there. Yeah. High gear, third gear. Yeah, it was acting like the synchro was jammed in high gear. So if you put it in reverse or first, it's locked basically in 2 gears. Nothing would spin. So that was frustrating and took quite a while to figure out. And then it didn't take too long to straighten it up. Getting to the bell housing bolts is possible. Can you see the bruise on my hand? Yeah, it's all swollen. This side I just kept hitting my hand up in here, trying to get to that. But yeah, it's possible with the right tools. Actually, I used a socket everywhere. Those are all 18 millimeter. And then that one I was missing a bolt, so I went and bought one, and it's now a 16 millimeter head. So the easier way to do it going forward, now once I have the motor mounts fabricated, would be to remove the transmission and the adapter from the bell housing and just leave the bell housing on the engine. I didn't do it that way because I had to have the bell housing on there to set up the throwout bearing and all of that. But yeah, got it together, and that's pretty much the update. Last issue I ran into is the radiator hose on the water pump over here is pointing out the passenger side. And the radiator, the Jeep radiator, has the upper and the lower on the same side, on the driver's side. So getting a hose, you cannot see anything with that. There we go. Getting the hose from the top to the radiator should be easy. Getting the hose to the bottom, I'm going to have to buy like some small exhaust pipe or something, stainless, and then do a U under the battery box to get it over. It'll be something. We'll see what I end up making work there. But yeah, thanks for watching. It's getting closer. I wouldn't say it's close. A lot of little things. I actually grabbed the old cardboard and added a bunch of stuff to it. We've got motor mounts, exhaust, battery, gas pedal, fuel pump, radiator hoses, and fuel line added to that list. And then the alternator. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is the alternator now protrudes into the battery. So I've either got to find a smaller battery or relocate this one, which I really don't want to do. There's plenty of room on this side, so maybe I will just relocate it to this side, but we'll see. All right, thanks.